Yeah. Yeah.
Infrastructure as code is everywhere, but should developers own it? Some say it gives them more autonomy, others argue it's a distraction from their core work. Today we're tackling that debate. Welcome to the What the FlowFactor podcast, where we challenge DevOps statements with real-world experiences. Today we have Rob Barnes and Jonathan with us, both with a lot of experience in infrastructure as code and DevOps. Quick disclaimer, I received the Best Flinglish Award at my previous job, so I will let you do all the talking today. Rob, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Can you briefly introduce yourself to the people who don't know you?
Sure. Okay. So I'm Rob Barnes. I'm a senior developer advocate at HashiCorp, primarily focused on security, to be fair. But before my security sort of career started, it was mostly infrastructure and ops. And now I've kind of moved more into software development. So, yeah.
Okay. Jonathan, you're also a new face to the podcast.
I'm Jonathan Bernards from FlowFactor. I am DevOps engineer for around 2.5 years now. And I love working with infrastructure as code and cloud infrastructures. Okay,
so you guys are the right people to join me in this conversation. So
allegedly.
Let's hope. Let's dive right in. Are developers responsible for managing infrastructure as code? Rob, you already did some mysterious things and said you have great opinions on this. What's your first reaction when I tell you this?
Well, it's kind of cliche. I think it depends, right? So, I've been working in tech, I don't know, maybe about 13, 14 years now. And in that time, I've worked at sort of startups, mid-sized enterprises, large enterprises. And the thing I've noticed is the smaller the company, the more responsibility people need to take on, right? So, if you're a startup, you are trying to get products to market fast. You're trying to generate revenue and sales as quickly as you can to get to the next milestone. You probably don't have time to hire a professional DevOps person, but you do have to hire developers because they're the people that are going to build your business value, the thing that's going to generate that revenue. So ultimately, they have to wear multiple hats. So in that scenario, they are the only people that can be responsible for infrastructure as code. It doesn't make sense to go and invest so much in a DevOps person whose value at that stage of the company's journey is so limited. But there are exceptions to that, even at startup level. So if you're in sort of like a heavily regulated industry, like healthcare or finance, for example, well, there are certain compliance sort of things that you have to, adhere to. And I think it's a lot to ask developers to be responsible for building the application according to the compliance codes and build the infrastructure according to that. I think at that point you can then justify bringing in someone that is, more focused and more experienced on just the infrastructure side, and you can let people focus on their areas of expertise. You get to a bigger organization, so the sorts of organizations that employ thousands of people, whether it's regulated or not, you tend to see that they have a set of their own internal compliance. Like they'll have like security posture that they want people to adhere to. They'll have a set of rules, a way that they want things done. And then I think to enforce that, you cannot have developers being responsible for that. That's Wild Wild West sort of waiting to happen. And that's kind of what I've seen over all those years. And I've seen sort of companies in sort of the larger size try to give autonomy to developers, and it's chaos. And it's chaos you never recover from.
It is.
Yeah, that's kind of my initial sort of thoughts on it.
Yeah, indeed. And to add on it, like when you're in that big company, they should at least not have the ownership of it. They should give it away, but they still should be possible to be able to work on that infrastructure as code, just to apply and apply their work and improve their systems. So they should be able to maintain it themselves. There should be a safety net for them to do it without any big interruptions or any catastrophical failures in the system. But they should not own it. They should really say like, that's up to you, but if I need it, I can do it myself quickly. I know it, but I feel comfortable having someone owning it rather than myself maintaining it, and I can still focus on my development part. I think that's...
I mean, it's like I used to do a lot of mentoring for sort of people that might consider themselves junior, right? And they would be scared to make a mistake, right? They'll be at their internships or their jobs and they'll be so scared to make a mistake. And I'll say to them, look, if you're scared to make a mistake, you're probably not in the right company, because you are someone who is learning. You're learning your craft, and it's their job to provide that safe environment for you to make mistakes. You're supposed to make mistakes. That's how you learn, right? And it's not supposed to impact the company. That's not your job. And I think for as experienced as a developer could be, you could have 25 years experience. If you are not used to infrastructure as code, for all intents and purposes, you are a junior when it comes to that. And it is the organization's responsibility to create that same safety that I speak about when I speak to my mentees.
Exactly, that's what a senior to me thought about as well. He said, like, when in doubt, just go flat out. And I still think about it often, because it is indeed the case. You should have like a pipeline that secures your development, that secures nothing will be broken after your change. And indeed, I still have developers coming to me like, hey, I've done this change. We still need to approve some changes, of course, because they change a lot. And if it's a small change, it will just go automatically. But if it's big, they want my approval. They want an ops to check it, and that's perfectly fine. But they still can do it themselves. They still can rely on operational person. So it's a bit like a gray zone. They can do it, but they shouldn't be responsible for it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
And I think also testing comes in handy at that part. Like, create tests for your devs, create tests for yourself, because you will make mistake even if you know your environment very well. That you can like say, hey, this test failed, so your change will be bad. So just do it this way, or let me fix it in another way. That's what testing helps a lot by as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the best practices later, but first, what do you guys see in practice? Practice at customers or people you see at HashiCorp? Who's mostly responsible for infrastructure as code?
So again, I see a spectrum. I see more mistakes than I do sort of good practice. And when I see good practice, it normally comes from a place of they've had to grow out of those mistakes. Which is to say, you know, if you're doing something and you kind of look at what you're doing, you're thinking, oh, what have we done? Why are we doing things this way? Don't feel so bad about it. Like the biggest companies in the world have probably made the same mistakes that you're making. Yeah. But essentially, what we tend to find is, this is the general pattern in general. This is not about HashiCorp, right? In general, when people are adopting any sort of tooling into their organization, there's someone who's sort of a big proponent behind it. If it's a sort of bottom-up organization, it'll be a developer who's gone to a conference, they've seen a demo of something, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's really cool. That'll make our lives a lot easier. They come back to work, they tell their boss about it, their boss speaks up the chain, and then next thing they get told, well, build a proof of concept and show us like what this thing is capable of. So, you know, they build a proof of concept, they demo it, the company's just like, that's great. What do you need to do to harden that, to put it into production, right?
Exactly.
And, you know, these people are not qualified to answer that question because they're new to that technology, right? But these are the demands that a business puts on them, and they are unfair demands, right? So they do what they think is production hardening, and next thing you know, this thing that was a proof of concept that really should have been throwaway code, it was just learning and observations, has now suddenly made it into production, right? And then what happens is, once it's in production, they're not getting the value out of it that they expected, right? And it's worse when it's like a commercially paid for product, right? Because you're paying all this money and you're not getting the business value back. You're not saving time. You're not improving your posture. So then what happens is they end up contacting people like me when I was a consultant and saying, hey, help us figure this out. And you have to rip it all out and kind of start again based on where their organization is, the scale they're operating at, their projected scale, and moving on, right? So in the field, I do see a lot of chaos. I see way more chaos than I do sort of structured, calm, organized approaches to, how infrastructure is kind of managed at scale. And, this whole platform engineering movement is kind of the popular sort of buzz phrase of the last few years. But I guess there's something real behind it, is when you talk about who owns it. Well, if the platform teams are responsible for creating that safety net, well, then they can own it and then people can consume it in sort of safe ways, right? If you want to do something that goes outside the realms of what they support, you, one, shouldn't be doing it, or two, you have an edge case which you need to bring to them and they will decide how they're going to support that edge case, if they'll support that edge case. But in practice, that's kind of what I see. I'm not sure how it is in Belgium, but sort of what I see is sort of the UK and the US, there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, indeed. Especially coming back to the POC, it's very known that, like, hey, you touched that part of code, you're an expert on it, can you help me with it? And he just touched it for like editing a little thing, and he's becoming the expert of the thing, and that's very wrong. Yeah. It's people are becoming experts way too easy, which is you should really examine the product, examine the environment, and before you can call yourself an expert on it. That's one thing. Another thing I also see often doing the mistake is like creating the silos of like saying, hey, this change is really operational, can you do that change? While it's just a small change, they can do it on their own. Vice versa as well, like an ops person wants to test something, he can fully test it himself. He has the API calls, he has the documentation, he doesn't need a developer to test it, he can test it himself. It's like the both ways that the silos should be broken, and it should be one big family, to say it like that.
Even what you said about experts, it triggered a memory. I remember I interviewed this many years ago. I interviewed at this massive quant research company, right? And they were looking for someone who was an expert in Vault, right? Which at the time, I was one of a few people in the UK that could do the thing that they wanted, right? But they also had some sort of Terraform stuff that they needed done as well, right? So in the interview, obviously they asked me a bunch of Vault questions, but then they asked me about Terraform. So, I answered them, but, I was by no means a Terraform expert. I just kind of used it quite a lot at that point. And I remember that the interviewer, I don't want to say his name, but I can remember his face as he said this. He goes, right, so you're a Vault expert, and he wrote that down on a piece of paper. He goes, you're definitely a Terraform expert, and he wrote that down. I said, whoa, I didn't say all of that. He goes, okay, but you are a Terraform expert. And I was like... And I remember, so I got the job, and I remember when I started, I said, what was all that all about? He goes, well, it was extra justification to hire you in at your price. So we wrote it down. So I was like, but I'm not a Terraform expert. He goes, well, they'll find out the hard way. That's really what happened.
Exactly. And we see it so often. It's on daily basis. You see like, hey, you're the expert of it. Can you come and fix it for me? It's like, I didn't touch it, or it's not even, I just made one commit on it. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not an expert.
Well, they get away with it because people are young and ambitious.
Exactly. Right? I want to look into it. I want to become an expert, but I'm not yet, It's take it slow, become a real expert, and don't fake it. That's the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that, the cultural aspect is also a big thing.
It's the biggest part.
Yeah, and that there's also needs to be middle ground. So developers should not have it dumped to their side, but they need to have a little bit of involvement in it. Yeah. How do you involve developers the right way in an infrastructure as code environment or context?
In my opinion, it's more driven by development, because the requirements become like, oh, your application needs to be able to do this, you need to be able to make this, and it becomes functional for the application. And when it becomes functional to the application will need infrastructure, etc. And then the ops guy needs to be become part of the discussion. What do we need of infrastructure? Do we need connections? Do we need just our resources to run it on? We need the firewall rules. We need everything around to create it safe. Like the whole environment needs to be put in that discussion as well when you need like a new feature in your application. Like these things, it's rather that way than the operational guy needs to say to your dev like, hey, we should do this. It can happen like on security matters mostly. It will be like rather that way, I suppose. But when it comes to now features, etc., it's most often that they need to get all the parties involved in the even architectural decisions. That's my vision and what I see from my client right now.
Doesn't work all the time though, that's the problem.
That's true, it doesn't work all the time. It's often that you come in late in the discussion and have to...
Even when you come in early.
Exactly.
So that same interview, the same company where I had the interview.
Sounds like a great one.
Do you know what? It's one of those jobs that I will never regret, but I will never do it again. Right?
Can imagine.
And I remember the day that I quit, I handed in my notice, and I said to... I can't remember what his job title was, but he basically used to report to the board. He was very senior. I said his name, let me not say his name. But I said to him, you should never have hired me. And he was like, what do you mean? I said, well, you told me that this organization was ready for change. You were ready to embrace the future and be more efficient. But what I saw out there wasn't people that were ready to change, right? These are people that are set in their ways, that fear redundancies, so they don't want anything new coming in. So I'm set up to fail from the get-go. So, respectfully, I quit. There's many other companies out there that can benefit from my skill set. And he asked me to elaborate on that. And I said, look, I don't want to stereotype people, but if you've been at a company for 25 years and you've been doing things a certain way all that time, these people are resistant to change. They're like dinosaurs, right? So before you say as a company, we're going to invest in a new DevOps way of working, we're going to adopt new practices, you have to make sure you've got the people who are willing to embrace that change. And if they're not willing to embrace it and that's the direction you want to go in, I'm sorry, you have to get rid of them. And then you have to replace them with people that are going to embrace that new change. So when I say it doesn't work all the time, what you described is exactly what I went through. So I was the initiator of these workshops, these discussions. I set up a whole team. I brought in everyone underneath me to kind of help me deliver this vision. We brought in all the different stakeholders, but just at every step there was resistance. And if you look at who the resistance is coming from, it'd all been there for almost 20 years or longer. It's the sort of the fresher people who had like new ideas and willing to embrace new ways of working and speed things up. They're the ones that were intrigued and, delivering their sort of requirements and asking, okay, so what's actually possible with this? And what if that happens? And so this is the thing, is just like going back to what you said earlier on, Jessica, culture is massive, absolutely massive. And, I know I've probably offended a few people talking about the amount of people that have been there for long periods of time. It's not to say everyone at a company who's been at a company for a long period of time is like that. It's the people that do not embrace change. They think that the way they've been doing things is the only way that things can be done. And I think that's, for me, a huge red flag when you see stuff like that. I don't know if you've seen stuff like that over here.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you look towards like what you create and what you do. For example, when I created my first project, I was like, wow, I did an amazing job. But when I look back at it now, I'm like, what did you do, Jonathan? What the hell did you actually wrote? You can throw it in a garbage and create something now. And if you don't have that vision, you still think like your code is still like your child. It won't work, because
like continuous improvement.
Exactly. That's what DevOps all is about. Like, we need to evolve, we need to improve everything we need, and that's That's something you have in yourself, or you might not have it in you, and you might be like, we are a creature of habits, I suppose, and that's
and we need to break that. Like,
exactly,
it's one of those things. But I mean, on the flip side of the coin, Jeff Mitchell once says, Jeff Mitchell is one of the people that built Vault for us, right? He once said something to me that I will never forget, and it changed my perspective pretty much forever. He said, sometimes we try to take people in a certain direction and they're just not ready to go there yet. We have to accept that. And it changed my thinking, because I had this conversation with him not long after I quit this job. And I was actually explaining to him, like, look, this is how I ended up doing this because of A, B, and C. And he was like, look, maybe instead of getting them to sort of from A to Z, you needed to take them from A to D, and then get them comfortable at D, then you can work on getting them to E, and so on and so forth, right? And I thought to myself, he's absolutely right. I'm pretty sure I still would have run into the same resistance because, like I say, some people don't want to change. But I think my success rate would have been a bit higher. And that was one of my biggest learning curves. So I think when it comes to infrastructure as code, it's obviously a lot more widely adopted now in this current day and age. But there are still a huge amounts of organizations who, they're still doing things very manually. They need a lot of help. And then where they do say, okay, we're going to invest in this now, they make the same mistakes we talked about in the beginning. And I think that's okay. But I think as long as we sort of have the right services to support them in their transition journeys, then it doesn't do too much damage. It's kind of where I kind of land on my thinking on this.
Yeah, I think that's a great one to go to the next question, because we see we're already talking a bit and we like to keep it short. But I think you're talking about small steps as a key takeaway for the people who are listening. What is a small step they can take when it comes to ownership of infrastructure as code? What's your opinion on that?
I think you depending on the organization, you've got to look at who is most concerned with infrastructure itself, right? So who's managing this infrastructure on a day-to-day, right? And now if it is the developers managing it, then the question becomes, is there someone else in the organization who's better placed to manage infrastructure, right? And if the answer is yes, then before you start implementing infrastructure as code, those are the people you need to target in terms of upskilling them, making them understand it's not just about codifying your infrastructure, it's about building a service for your customer. And your customer is going to be your colleagues, your devs, right? If the developers are the people that are best placed to do that, well then, they are the ones that are going to have ownership. So maybe a good way to start is you take one developer who seems to be most enthusiastic about the change, and you upskill that person. You give them the responsibility of working with the team to codify them. They almost become like an SRE, right? And then they can go about slowly upskilling the team based on what they're learning. I always find the best way to learn is to teach, right? So if you learn something, teach it to someone else. Because I promise you, they will highlight the gaps in your knowledge. They'll ask you questions to which you do not know the answers, and you can both go and find out together, right? So I think in terms of that, I think we shouldn't think about infrastructure as code straight away. We should just think about infrastructure, and it should land in the right places within an organization. But going back to what you were saying about the continuous improvement, just because the answer is A today doesn't mean that tomorrow the answer is still going to be A. Exactly. So you have to continually keep looking at these things here. And you never kind of get to a finish point where you say, okay, we've taught this person infrastructure as code. That's it. It doesn't work like that, right? It's continuous, and more people are going to have to be upskilled. The people that have already been upskilled are going to have to continually keep their knowledge and experience fresh with these things. So it's a continuous thing. It takes huge investment. But I think the first step is just recognizing who's responsible for infrastructure. As for how you manage infrastructure, obviously infrastructure as code is the most widely accepted way of doing things. But it's just tooling at the end of the day. Cultures and organization is kind of the most important thing in my mind.
Yeah, I think that summarizes it well. Getting the ownership right, getting the vision towards what you want, and making these small baby steps towards your goal. That's what will improve it very well, very quick, I think.
Okay, that's a nice takeaway, I think. How did you guys feel about being here today?
Oh, great! I always
Yeah.
love coming to Belgium. Contich is great. Yeah, I love it here, and I love being around you guys as well. So
Oh, that's a great compliment. Thank you. We also love being around you.
Yeah, it's a nice first experience. I like it. It's a nice chat to have with Rob. It's amazing. You're very intelligent, and I like your visions. It's really teaching me a lot as well. Like, you have way more experience than me, and I like to learn from it. It's cool.
you said very intelligent, right?
Yeah.
This is being recorded.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I'll use it
I'm
as
gonna
a
play
short.
it to my wife.
Yeah, I'll use it as a short snippet to promote the podcast everywhere. So no, I note that you will be joining us next season also, Jonathan.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay,
Depends on the topic. If I know something about, if I'm an expert, maybe.
you'll get there. Okay, thanks a lot for joining us both, and
Thanks
for
for
all
having
the listeners, see you in the next episode.
Yeah.